Hi, listener. Just a quick note before we start. Today's episode of Separate Bathrooms contains discussion of domestic abuse. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call 000.
For further support, you can call 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or visit 1800respect.org.au. We've also included links and phone numbers of support in the description of this episode.
The thing is that if you're not in it and you have not been in those manipulative situations, you can't even comprehend the way that person, that loved one, is even thinking. And oftentimes them feeling judged or pressured is what keeps them from talking to someone about it.
Welcome to Separate Bathrooms. I'm Daddo.
I'm Daddo.
Today we're talking with Dr. Amelia Kelly. She's the co-author of a brand new book called What I Wish I Knew, Surviving and Thriving After an Abusive Relationship.
There's so much in the news today, as I'm sure you've heard, about domestic abuse, and stats are abounding with increases due to COVID lockdowns. Dr. Kelly has some really interesting insights about this.
I'm hoping that she can help me understand some things too. I mean, our kids watch a show, I think it's called Catfish. Catfish?
Yeah.
Which, for those of you who don't know, it's not about noodling or casting a line for the elusive catfish. It's about pretending to be someone you're not online and luring them into a trap. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm grasping the concept of catfish. Point is, there's a slew of new terms: gaslighting, love bombing, stonewalling. The label that guy threw out on maths the other night, narcissism, narcissistic. Clearly he had his own definition, or was that a projection that he was doing, that guy?
Well, I mean, Dr. Kelly talks a lot about that in regards to being in an abusive relationship in the book. She addresses a lot of those terms. Her credits are amazing. She has a doctorate of philosophy in psychology, along with a master's in art therapy, which is really interesting, and counselling from Nazareth College of Rochester. She's a trained hypnotherapist, art therapist. Her practice is currently part of the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium at the Kinsey Institute, which is a really big deal, the Kinsey Institute.
Yeah. So What I Wish I Knew, Surviving and Thriving After an Abusive Relationship. It's a must-read for anyone coming out of an abusive relationship or anyone who has worries about the nature of the relationship they're currently in.
Yeah, the structure of the book is really unique. So the first segment of each chapter is written by a survivor of partner abuse, detailing both the early and later stages during the relationship with their abuser.
Yeah, and this is followed by an analysis from Dr. Kelly of the red flags that were missed and, most importantly, the strategies to recognise and overcome them.
Yeah, let's talk about all of that.
Yeah, let's dive into this and welcome Dr. Amelia Kelly into the bathroom. Dr. Amelia Kelly, welcome to the bathroom. Where are you today?
Well, I'm not in my bathroom, but I'm next to my bathroom. I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina? I don't think we've ever spoken to anyone from North Carolina. I think
Really?
Milwaukee? Yeah, no, you're our first North Carolinian guest. How lovely.
What do North Carolina people, what are you called, North Carolinians? Carolinians?
I think it would be North Carolinians.
Carolinians.
Of course.
Yes, it sounds much classier.
It does. I might start calling myself Sydney Linians. I'm from Sydney Linear. No, it doesn't work.
I do have
Melbourne
to admit
Linear?
I'm actually a New Yorker. I'm actually a New Yorker who moved here when I was in my early 20s. So I think I'm a split Yankee, Southerner, all in one.
There you go. Amelia, you've written a book called What I Wish I Knew, Surviving and Thriving After an Abusive Relationship. We just want to dive right in and have you talk about it and some of the terms. And I guess the first question is, what made you write this book?
So this book was a collaborative effort between myself and my co-author, Kendall Ann Combs. She's a survivor of intimate partner violence, and I was on her podcast, High Heels and Heartache. At the end of the episode, I just turned to her. She has experts on talking about survival and trauma. And I just looked at her and said, wouldn't it be really awesome to have a book about everything you've learned? And that's where it began. But what we began with was not where it ended up, because she went into a much more authentic, genuine, vulnerable space and shared her whole survivor story, beginning, middle, and end. And so the layout is really neat. It's different than anything you've ever seen. Every chapter, she writes as she progresses, and then I come back in every chapter with research, red flags, clinical advice. So you get memoir and self-help all within one book. It's really unique.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful.
You mention a lot of terms, and I need to understand some of these things. One of them is love bombing. What is that?
It's a very confusing topic, and I think it's something that always is seen in a bad light, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I'll put that out there. Love bombing is any efforts made by someone to influence another, and this could be in order to win their affection. And so love bombing can be seen even in some healthy avenues when you're first meeting someone and you're trying to woo them and do all these lovely things for them that maybe you may not keep up with for the rest of your relationship. It can also be seen in times later into a relationship where you're trying to regain the affection of your partner. Maybe you've hurt their feelings or offended them, so you bring them flowers or make promises that you'll change behaviors. So you're trying to impact and influence the other person. These are examples of when it's a healthy display of love bombing, but when an abuser or a potential narcissist uses love bombing, it's never met with actual change, and it's all in a ploy or a method to gain control over the love bombee. And the love bombing efforts of a potential abuser are usually much more grand and much harder to ignore. I once was talking to someone saying, you remember that episode of Friends where Ross sends a whole singing quartet to go apologize to Rachel?
Yeah.
That's a good example of love bombing in the extreme. So it's technically a kind of like a gaslighting method, if you will.
Okay, that's really interesting, because I think I've done a bit of love bombing in my time in our relationship, but in a good way.
We both have,
for
sure. But that's what Amelia was saying. There's positive love bombings.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned the word narcissistic, and that it's a term that gets thrown around fairly willy-nilly. I feel like, oh, you're such a narcissist because you just made this about yourself, but there is more of a technical psychological term that you talk about in your book. What effect does being with a narcissist have, and what does it actually look like to be a true narcissist?
I love that you brought up the normalcy of the term and that it is used often. And that is because it's a human quality. We are born narcissistic. You know, little kiddos should be narcissistic in order to get their needs met. But when needs are not met, it can start to evolve into this narcissistic rage or this disordered version of narcissism, which is what's incredibly difficult to be treated when it forms into someone's actual personality. And so when it becomes disordered, it's going to start negatively impacting all your relationships, and it's going to be met with a lack of care for other people's feelings, a lack of remorse, and it can start to bleed into interpersonal relationships. So you were saying, what does it look like when it's with, I'll use a romantic relationship, even though it can come out in all different places. Yeah. Oftentimes, if you're with a narcissist, they are going to have their own best interest at heart. And so they're going to manipulate any scenario they can into a way that makes their needs be met first before yours. They are not going to be cheerleading for you. They are not going to encourage you to have an individual identity. So if you feel like your identity and your life and your social circles even are starting to become compressed and smaller in order to meet the needs or what's called narcissistic supply for the narcissist, then that's certainly a red flag to look out for.
Can you do me a favor? Can you just define narcissism in as distilled way as you possibly can for me and for our listener?
Sure. So I'm going to, if it's okay, piece it into two different types because I think that's really useful to know. There's insecure narcissism and grandiose narcissism. So grandiose narcissists are going to do anything they can to elevate themselves above others, and they will often be incredibly charming, and they will know how to save face and to make themselves present in the best way possible. And when they're not being presented in that way, when they're not getting mirrored back what they want, they will do anything they can in order to make the other person feel like everything is their fault. So the goal of a grandiose narcissist is to raise themselves above others at the cost of their well-being. The insecure narcissist is a little bit harder to detect at times because they're not what we typically think of as a narcissist, as far as charming and kind of good at people-pleasing in a situation that makes things look good for them. Insecure narcissists think everyone's out to get them. They're very much the victim. They very often will have a lot of issues with abandonment. And so everything becomes, again, about them. That's the whole point of narcissism, to refocus attention on yourself as much as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Okay. Do you think that we all have a little bit of narcissism in us? I mean, you mentioned that with little kids, right? I mean, that's the way they get their needs met.
Absolutely. I mean, really, we should be a little narcissistic. We should have some sense of awareness of the self and focus on the self. But when it is to the extreme or detriment of others is when it's no longer healthy. And you can even go further into some schools of thought about when we start to detach from the self, we start to find more joy. And that is an example of someone who's able to pull away from our narcissistic tendencies. But I mean, look at social media, look at the ways that we have to, if we have something we care about in the world that we need to get out to the world, we almost have to market ourselves now.
Yes,
so it
true.
creates this cycle where everyone is kind of encouraged to be in this mindset.
Yeah. We actually just had a conversation with our 16-year-old about that because you look at the feeds of teens these days and everything is themselves looking cute, holding their, phone up to the mirror. And her older sister was like, God, it's so narcissistic. And our youngest was like, it's not narcissistic. It's like we think we look cute. So we want to show people how cute we look. And it's like this fine, that term is being used in that way, but it's very like the social media has really turned us into looking at ourselves physically and how we want to present ourselves and manipulate it in a lot of ways, which is part of the narcissistic behavior, I guess. So, yeah.
Definitely. And I think one thing to be mindful of when you speak about kids, especially, or just even adults, is that if it starts to deplete that sense of well-being, if you feel anxiety, if you feel a lot of comparisons happening, like if you can't focus on your goals and what you're excited about, but instead you're comparing yourself to others constantly, you're probably feeding into the more unhealthy aspects of narcissism.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What are the biggest roadblocks that trauma survivors face today?
I think one of them being, in my opinion, well, aside from lack of resources, because it is hard to find therapy sometimes, I do think that's starting to change as telehealth becomes more prominent and hopefully, fingers crossed, mental health is becoming more and more normalized. I've always said we should all have a family doctor and a family therapist. I don't think it should just be, someone you call in the matter of a crisis, but it's more of just this normal, regular cultural thing.
Yeah.
But I do believe this notion that you're going to just kind of flip a switch and get over it. I'm not saying that people can't heal. There's huge healing that happens with trauma. Actually, some trauma clients I work with end up being the most incredible and gifted and insightful people I've ever known when they can work through it. But it's definitely a journey that, as you were saying, the body, that involves the body. So I know when I hire clinicians at my practice, there are a certain set of books or literature that I ask them to read before they even start working with clients, because I want to make sure they're on the same page as my practices, that trauma is in the body and it's not just something you talk about, it's something you have to feel about as well.
Yeah. Is one of those books The Body Keeps Score? Is that Dr. Van der Kessel?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, it's a great book.
I love that book.
Isn't it amazing? It's so interesting. I love him as a writer too. No surprise here for you. I'm sure it's the same in America. In fact, I'm sure it's worldwide. COVID has certainly exacerbated domestic abuse situations here in Australia. As someone not in a relationship that is abusive, what do we do as parents, neighbours, colleagues, friends, if we suspect that someone that we love is being abused? How do we go about helping that person?
I think one of the most important things as part of our mission with the book that we published and with some of the platform work we've been doing is making this more of a conversation.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how just maybe 10, 15 years ago, things like miscarriage weren't as discussed, and how it's becoming more of a normalized conversation. And all of a sudden, everyone's looking at each other and realizing what a universal issue it is. Or you look at Me Too, which was not first coined only a couple years ago, but has grown to much more attention in the last couple of years. And how suddenly there's this revolution of everyone coming out and saying, hey, me too, this happened to me. And it's more of an open dialogue. So there's not as much shame when something is openly dialogued. Yep. And so I really do believe not only do people need to be more open and have more conversations and make this something where we champion for survivors, not victims, survivors. It's so important to use that terminology. But
why?
Beyond that,
why is it so important?
Oh, it's so important because, first of all, if you meet someone who has survived abuse, their resilience and their strength is incredible. Like, to be able to get through something like that, and even if they're in the midst of leaving, I don't want to say you're not a survivor until you leave. Let's be clear about that. But just being able to completely change the whole programming that happens of you from an abuser, to have the strength to reprogram and say, no, not me, and to recognize what's happening and to get out is, I think, one of the most difficult things any human being can do. It's incredible to see that happen. And those who have gone through that, they tend to have this kind of super sense about people sometimes after, where they can pick up on certain traits and certain qualities that they might even be more likely to champion for other people for than they would have been before the relationship.
Yep. We both are ambassadors for a charity here in Australia called Rise Up Australia, and they work with survivors of abuse as they're getting out of the shelters. That we set up homes for them. So, and usually out of area, they are anonymous to us. We never meet them, because that's part of the safety that's in place. And as you know, the most dangerous time for a survivor is as they're leaving. And so they are wrapped in as much care as possible and given these homes for their children or on their own. Sometimes they bring their dogs with them. and we set
I
up these
love
homes
that.
for them. Yeah, it started by this incredible woman, Nicole Edwards, who just came across someone that was fleeing from one side of the country to the other, just with her handbag and 2 children. And she started this
my
charity.
goodness.
Yeah, and but it's such an important, that's that next step for them, and watching and hearing about, their stories and how giving them the next step for them is so incredibly important. So, yeah, it's a good one.
It is.
People don't always think about the pets, and just kind of throwing that out there. That is actually sometimes what keeps people in too, because they don't have a safe place to go where they can bring that close relationship with them. So having safe spaces
right.
where pets can go too. I know there are some really great organizations focusing on that because it is important.
Yeah. Yeah, great.
How does someone safely extract themselves from an abusive relationship? Can you give us some tips on that?
Sure. And, one of the, I know that you were saying, Allie, the time of leaving is the most dangerous. And that is, if, for the listeners that read the book, you'll see what happened to Kenna Land during that time. And that was true to form with her situation as well. So we actually offered a fully comprehensive safety plan within the book for readers to sit down with a trusted person. We really try to champion for this idea of getting someone in your corner that you'll talk to. So if you don't feel safe doing that with people who know your abuser, reaching out to an anonymous person or even a coworker who doesn't have any connection to them. I know that might sound kind of wild, but anyone, just having anyone that you are willing to speak to will multiply the likelihood that you leave and multiply the likelihood that you leave safely. So thinking you need to do this alone is something that is, I hate to use the word brainwash too much, but it is a brainwashing method to make the person feel that they're isolated and that no one has their back. But even if you just want to reach out to agencies or to us, like, we've got your back. We will help you and champion and try to get you hooked up with services and tell you, like, you need someone to be with you during that process.
Yeah.
In the safety plan, we go through lots of different things as far as, kind of setting up the logistics of what to do if some of the red flags are shown, safe spaces to be in the house, what to get ready, different strategies to have set up ahead of time. So it can be pretty comprehensive, but it can also be very simple too.
Yeah, it sounds like your book is something that you can give to someone who, if you're thinking someone is being abused, slide them your book under the door and see if that helps them. But with the strategies that you offer, sounds really important.
We even thought about, when we were designing the cover, we even thought about just that. We didn't want it to be a book that if a potential abuser or someone saw, that they would instantly know what the person was reading. So
Right.
It's got this very light and airy and kind of happy cover to it. And yes, the full title's on there, but the part that is a little bit more, I guess, incriminating is very, very small. And all you see is the big "what I wish I knew." So we even thought about, like, if you're sitting on a train and you're reading, you feel that need to curve the back so no one can see what you're reading. Like, little things like that, just that anonymity was important to us.
Yeah, because I can imagine if that person is sitting on a train reading a book, which is a rarity these days because most people are just looking at their phones. But to see abusive relationship on there, you'd be like, "Oh, are you okay?" Did I understand you correctly? Is that a form of gaslighting where an abuser would say, "You don't have anyone, you're on your own, you need me"?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the more dangerous forms of gaslighting, and gaslighting is any way an abuser or an emotional abuser especially will try to make you question your sanity and make you question your reality and question even your ego strengths. And one of the best ways for a gaslighter to do that is to take away your support system.
Yeah.
And one of the only ways they can really effectively do that is to incriminate your support system, oftentimes by saying, well, here's an example that a client had told me once, that they had been convinced that their parents really didn't have their best interests at heart because they didn't like the significant other. And it just was just this, like, really ingrained cycle of, well, if they don't like me, then they don't support you, then they're not supporting us. And it was a lot of legwork to get that isolation happening where that division was happening, so that then she lost that close connection with her parents, which was luckily revived. But that is such a specific gaslighting tactic that is overused.
And is that also part of you use the term power of isolation? That's the same. Is that the same technique?
Yeah. Gaslighting is needed in order to use the power of isolation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
There can be other ways of isolating too, though. You can physically isolate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because you hear, I know often you hear stories about a couple that lived in the city and then often they suddenly move to the country and and the wife doesn't know anyone, and that's a whole physical form of isolation.
Definitely. There's too many different ways that can be done. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doctor, just to circle back on something, what signs do we look for that someone is going through or in an abusive relationship?
Thank you for that question, because it's so important to explore this, because some people feel a little helpless when it comes to this, and being able to know how to help loved ones is wonderful. And also knowing that it's okay to approach that person is important. So if you do feel like someone that you love is becoming more isolated, if you have concerns about any interactions you've seen with their partner, it's okay to speak up. But remember, a lot of times these individuals are very strategic at how they abuse. And so you may not notice the abuse happening just in the dynamic between the partnership. Instead, it's probably going to be more so that there's a major shift or change in your relationship with them. And maybe you're noticing that they're losing a sense of who they are. We all change a bit when we get into a new relationship. I mean, we're constantly expanding and learning and doing new things. But if there's things that they found a lot of joy in and they've let these go, and maybe they're showing some signs of mental health issues even, those are also signs to look out for. Another thing is being mindful, and it's a completely different issue if they have children as well.
Yeah.
So if you're noticing that the children are starting to struggle a lot, and or maybe even some children are willing to talk about it before their parents are, based on their age, based on what support networks they have to talk to. So the big thing is, if you feel that gut instinct, it's okay to say something. Now, how you go about saying it, that's really tricky.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we have some tips on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So the biggest thing is coming at it from a non-judgmental standpoint. And also never, ever making that person feel like you're pressuring them to leave. I think that is something that we all would want to do. We'd want to say, well, why would you stay with this person? Why would you constantly put yourself into this dangerous situation? Why would you want to be with someone treating you this way? The thing is that if you're not in it and you have not been in those manipulative situations, you can't even comprehend the way that person, that loved one, is even thinking.
Yeah.
Or some of the fear that they might have. And oftentimes them feeling judged or pressured is what keeps them from talking to someone about it.
Yeah. Okay.
So being really, kind of more the listener and just being with them and saying, I'm going to be here to hear whatever you need to tell me. And when you're ready, I am here. Those things are very important. If they're willing, giving them resources like my book or your local hotlines based on what country you live in. There are so many wonderful hotlines. I know the hotline.org in our country. I don't know what it is in Australia, but those are wonderful resources. There can also be local resources too. I know here in Raleigh we have Interact, which I've worked with closely, and they're fantastic. And these people are there because they want to help.
Yeah.
And further, maybe even talking about just the normalcy of this, that this person is not different or alone. Unfortunately, they're 1 in 3. It's so common. And I would even say Kendall Ann's podcast, High Heels and Heartache, is a good example because she's a survivor and she normalizes it and talks to other survivors. So I think the main thing is just being there and being compassionate and not pushing and not judging.
Yeah.
Sometimes these things can take a long time. I know
Yes.
someone who's been in something like this for a decade,
Yeah.
and still won't make the choice, and it's very difficult. So have to step back and not, like you say, not push and just wait for them, but just, I guess, tell them that I'm here.
Definitely. And, as a clinician, I see this happen with clients of mine quite often, where I'll have to get to a point where I ask them, am I helping you stay or am I helping you leave? And that is really a huge turning point a lot of times, because if they're not ready to leave, and it could be for so many different reasons,
Yeah.
I have to be there to just help build up their resilience and their personal independence and belief in themselves. So, if you have a loved one or a friend or someone who's in an abusive relationship, keep inviting them out to do things. Try to get them to do things that, if they can and if they're able to, so that you can continue strengthening those relationships and they can have a life outside of that relationship. That's going to make it more likely when they're ready to leave, they'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
that's great.
Ask your thriving question. Elle wrote a great question, and I'm
Well,
not going to ask you because it's hers.
Well, I just love that you have thriving in your title of the book. And many people would not feel like they probably could ever thrive again after what they've survived. But what are the first steps to thriving after being in an abusive relationship? I'm sure it's all in the book, but I'm so curious about that. What feels like thriving, and what are the steps to take?
I just took a deep breath because I think that would be the first thing I would ever say. Being able to connect with what we all have walking around, knowing the power of our body's ability to heal in just something as simple as a deep breath. Something as simple as just regulating our nervous system, I think, is a big part of thriving, because too often I think when others want someone to heal and thrive and, quote, get through something, they'll start being thrown all these coping strategies and resources and things to go out and try. And sometimes that person's not ready. There's this really cute children's book called A Rabbit Listened, and it's about this little boy whose blocks fall over, and the chicken comes and says, let's talk. And he's like, I don't want to. The bear says, let's be angry, let's growl. And the characters, no, I don't want to. And there's all these animals that come and kind of represent what we all try to do to get someone to cope. And then finally the rabbit just comes and sits and just is with the little boy. It's so sweet. It's so sweet.
Beautiful.
And it's exactly where thriving begins.
Yeah.
That's what
perfect.
my wife does. That's what you do. You're the rabbit.
Oh,
Because Al's not one of those ones like me. I come up and go, here, have an aspirin. Here, drink some more water. Here, let's go for a walk. Let's go surfing. Al will just go and sit down beside you and go, just puts her hand on your back. Just
Yes.
sits there.
Just
Okay?
being.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's your unique name, Rabbit.
Thanks,
Oh,
What's
now
the
I can
book?
take credit for your new pet
You
name.
can. What's the book?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm the shark.
Oh, it's literally called The Rabbit Listened. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
The Rabbit
Oh,
listened.
it sounds like a book for every parent and every grown-up, actually.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Oh, I love it. And it's the drawings in it are very simplistic and
Yeah.
beautiful. I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, yep.
Do you have 3 top tips? 3 things that takeaways for thriving?
For
including
thriving.
the individual who is not out of this abusive relationship. Someone, I know there's going to be someone who's listening today that is enmeshed and cannot get out in their mind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, gosh, I almost feel like I would need 2 separate lists, but I want
Okay.
to make it for everyone. So let's
Okay.
try.
All right.
So I think the top 3, number 1 is your worth, is knowing your worth and knowing that you are absolutely worthy of being respected and being loved and being taken care of and feeling safe. So I think feeling and knowing and claiming that sense that you are worthy it's so important. And I wish I could just, if one listener that you have hears me and knows this and feels this, that is everything.
Yeah.
That right there catapults all the coping skills to come.
Yep.
The other, again, I think is trusting your body, listening to your body, knowing in the good sense that, your body can breathe for you. It can breathe right in this moment. It can let you know when you're upset. It can let you know when you're in danger, is to listen to your body a bit more. If you get that nauseous gut feeling around something or a tightness in your chest, that is a very sophisticated part of your body telling you you're not thriving, so we need to do something about it. And then the third thing I think is like I said before, community. And that doesn't have to be a huge network. That can just be one single person.
Yeah.
And for some, it could be a therapist. For some, it could be an anonymous person. Or for some, it could be maybe someone that you've lost touch with through the relationship. And this goes for both someone in the relationship or someone who newly left. I promise you that person wants to hear from you. Like, do not let the messaging that you received make you think that that person does not want to hear from you, because they do. So it's okay to reach out any way you feel comfortable. Some people, I think we've trained ourselves out of calling people.
Yeah.
So even a text message or, a message on social media, just something to reach out can be huge. So reaching out, trusting how your body is talking to you, and knowing that you are worth being taken care of. I think those 3 things are so pivotal.
Yeah, they're great.
I've written them down. They're great.
Yep. Dr. Amelia Kelly, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much for this book. I know it's a really sensitive subject, and we're aware that, this podcast may be going out to people who are still in relationship with an abuser or who have just gotten out. But books like this is so important, and I'm so grateful that you wrote it. And I'm so grateful to who was the lady that you wrote it with? What was her name?
Kendall Ann.
I'm glad she's free. I'm glad that she was able to share her story too. That is very brave of her, and grateful to her as well.
Yes, hugely brave. I learned so much from her, even just going through the process with her. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you for your time today, Amelia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, she was fascinating on a very, as I said, very sensitive topic. Really grateful to hear a lot of her tips, her knowledge. I think that book sounds like a real important one.
Yeah, the book is What I Wish I Knew, and that's written in big writing, and in smaller writing, Surviving and Thriving After an Abusive Relationship.
Yeah.
You can pick it up at Dymocks.
Dymocks.
It's online, Amazon, and you can get it via your Kindle. That's the way you read your books.
Yeah.
I loved it. Feeling worthy, listen to your body, and reach out.
Yeah. We'll leave it there, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you so much for listening.
Take care.